Can I just say one thing firstly? I love the name Eat, Sleep, Boxing, Repeat.
ESBR Boxing in association with Sharp Betting. You're obviously betting company that deals with horse racing, boxing, football tips and tricks, and all that sort of stuff with analysis. Paul, we are here obviously from the boxing component of that partnership. We're just offer some insight and some prediction and some preview into some world title action, which is taking place in the Bears Arena in Astana. IBF World Middleweight and WBO World Middleweight titles on the line. Janibek, possibly the number one in the division. We'll come to that in a second. Versus Anauel and Ngamissengue, a fighter that at the channel, one of the favourites actually at this channel, and one we are well versed in as well. Paul will talk us through some Anauel's CV in a moment. But Paul, we don't like to get too obviously bogged down, do we? Obviously, obviously everyone knows who Janibek is. Everyone kind of knows a little bit, I suppose, about the middleweight division. Now you've obviously got the likes of the recent fight with Adames and Shiraz, and we'll touch on that as well. But the first thing I want to ask you, Paul, really is, in your mind, we spoke about this before. We spoke a little bit before the Shiraz Dames fight on whether Janibek was number one in the division, or whether one of those other two fighters was, and we kind of landed on the fact that Janibek was number one at that time. Is that something you still believe, or do you think, having seen the Adames Shiraz fight, that may be the new number one in the division?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, mate. And very well done there with that, with the pronunciation of that name. You did very well. Fair play to you. Um, yes, I think he is number one in the division at middleweight, Janibek, because yeah, I think we have discussed this before. I think in a previous fight, and we definitely had him top two. I think both of you and I maybe even had Shiraz. We were kind of high on that on the Shiraz train, but obviously having seen that Adames fight, it looked like the weight was a massive issue for Hamza Shiraz. Maybe took away a lot of his best attributes that night. Adames, though, on the other hand, was brilliant. He could well be Adames could well be the number one. I think he surprised a lot of people against Hamza Shiraz. He looked very, very good. Won that comfortably in my eyes. I think you agree as well. But I don't know, is he number one? No. I probably have Janibek at number one now. He's also got two belts, so two of the four belts. So some of that people don't have to give that any credence really, but he's got two of the belts, and then Lara obviously has one, and Adames have one. I think now with Shiraz looking like he's going up to 168 as well. They're your top three. The three world champions are the top three. And for me, yeah, Janibek's top of the lot for me, mate, at 160, mate. What about yourself?
Yeah, I can't disagree with that. I think you hit that on the head there. I think it's very hard to say against Janibek now, obviously holding the two belts. I still think there's a sort of credible criticism that he hasn't necessarily fought. He needs a sort of big fight, really, doesn't he? I think it's fair to say. He just step in probably with the likes of Adames or Shiraz, which is what we're hoping, rather than this fight. To be perfectly honest with you, but I still think it's not his fault necessarily. You got to defend the belts, but I think, yeah, I think number one for me. I think I'd have Adames at two, frankly. I think he handled Shiraz convincingly. And I think Shiraz was relatively disappointing in that fight, whether that's a one off performance or whether that was just kind of, there's bigger issues with the weight, like you described as well. It's going to be interesting to sort of see where he goes from there. But I think, yeah, Janibek at one, Adames at two. That'd be the fight for the number one for me, to be honest, within the division. Very impressed with Adames. But yeah, Janibek at number one for me. But let's just touch on a little bit, I suppose, on the other champions in the division. Obviously, we've just mentioned there Carlos Adames, but obviously, you've got Erislandy Lara still kicking around as well. The sort of elder statesman that division. How would you put Janibek and pitch Janibek in those two fights? Do you think the Lara fight? Are you seeing that as stoppage? Are you seeing that as points? Same with the Dames. How are you seeing those fights play out, please?
Yeah, I think I'm back. I would probably back Janibek to win all of those, as I said, with him being the number one. The It's whether or not he stops them or not. I think Erislandy Lara is maybe getting on a little bit, but I think he's looked pretty good of late. Maybe not the most active champion, but I think he's looked very good. I think that could be a tough night for Janibek. I think Janibek wins it. I don't think he'd get Lara out of there early. If it was going to be a stoppage, it would be late for me. Maybe even the last three rounds of the 4 rounds of the fight. Very late championship rounds kind of stuff. And similarly with Adames, I mean, I could see that going points. I think Adames did take a few shots from Shiraz. Shiraz meant to be this frightening puncher, and he just kind of shook them off. Janibek obviously a big puncher as well, but yeah, I would maybe back Janibek to beat Adames. I think, but I think that one would maybe go the distance. So yeah, I would predict right here, right now. I would say Janibek beats everybody at middleweight, beats Lara by very late stoppage, and he beats Adames on points for me, mate. How you see them playing out if they were to happen?
You know, I kind of screw with that. I think what's lower now, 41 as well. So you got to look at that and go, don't get me wrong, impressive last time out against Garcia, but Garcia's obviously not the fighter he was either. So I feel like, Lara still, like you said, still very, very capable. Does he have the nous to get to the end? Quite possibly, quite tricky. Maybe he does. Maybe Janibek cruises to points win, but I still think I'd back Janibek quite convincingly in that fight, to be honest with you. I think the Adames one for me is the interesting one. I think, the performance he had against Shiraz was a real kind of eye opener for a lot of people. Very, very tricky, but I still feel like Janibek might get that done on points as well. But I still expect it to be a close fight. So yeah, for me, prevails against both of them. Points, possible stoppage against Lara, but convincing victory if not. But Paul, we are here obviously to talk about Janibek versus Anauel and the Ngamissengue, which is pronounced. Apologies for pronunciation; it's not on point there, but I'm going to do my best. Obviously, a fighter, as I mentioned, alluded to, really that we're not necessarily too well versed in here, obviously. But I suppose what I'm asking you for predictions in this fight is: do you see Janibek as a stoppage here? Do you see this as being a credible opponent? Do you see a guy with 14 wins, 9 KOs, no losses, but obviously fought mostly in France? Do you see him as a credible opponent, or do you think it's a kind of convincing Janibek victory, possibly by stoppage or even by points? Please let us know.
Yeah, I think on the surface, the Frenchman is 14-0, 9 stoppages, looks very good. But as you said, when you dig a little deeper, that is such a padded record. He does have one good win, but it was a majority decision over 8 rounds against your man Theodore who was 22-0 on the Usyk Dubois undercard back in Poland. So yeah, but it was an 8 rounder, and it was a majority decision win against a limited fighter as well. Is he deserving of an IBF and WBO world middleweight title shot? Probably not, but you know what those governing bodies are like. He's got a high ranking somehow. I don't see him posing any sort of threat here for Janibek. I see Janibek steamrolling him, to be honest. I think he's so very, very limited. And again, like I said in our other preview of fights this weekend, if you haven't checked it out already, Joyce Hergovich, I would be surprised if this sees the 5th round. I think Janibek will get through Ngamissengue very, very early. Probably round 3, round 4 stoppage for me, maybe even earlier.
Yeah, I think it's gonna be one-sided. Totally agree with you. I think it's one of those sort of disappointing ones, really, in a way. So they're going, Janibek, like I said, you kind of want him to fight sort of better names in the division, elite names in the division. And don't get me wrong, this guy is, he's obviously undefeated. It's not his fault either. But it's just somewhat, you want him sort of in there with likes of Dames, with the likes of Lara, with the likes of sort of Shiraz if he still hangs around. But yeah, I think Janibek convincing. Wouldn't be surprised if it was over in the first sort of 3-4 rounds, to be perfectly honest with you either. So we, I suppose, are unified and aligned in our predictions this week, obviously on the Janibek stoppage. But as Paul mentioned there, please check out the other previews that we've been doing. Joe Joyce, obviously Filip Hrgović. Like and subscribe to the channel. All your boxing needs up and under one roof. All that's left for me to say is, Paul, thank you very much for joining me. And as usual, guys, thank you very much for watching.
Pleasure as always, mate. Cheers.